Hi, everybody. We're going to be starting shortly. People are filing in. I'm going to put some food in my face before we begin. Hi, Pat.
Hello, Matt.
Hello, Matt.
That was Al.
Oh, hey, Al. How are you? Hi, Al.
Merry Christmas.
Certainly enjoyed all the treats that you brought us, Pat. Thank you so much. That was really nice.
I'm so glad you did. I didn't know how many people were actually, there digging or whatever they were doing. But I thought, well, you can't have too much, right?
Everybody's been cycling through and getting the snacks, so they are not going to go to waste. I guarantee you.
Good.
They're almost all gone.
What?
There's like 3 little brownies left, a couple of candy canes, some pralines, and some trail mix. And like, I have to say I'm responsible for like 2/3 of that, but Dennis.
No.
Good. I was feeling pretty guilty how much I've been eating, Mary. So.
Well, Dennis and Chris got to-go boxes.
Chris got what?
To-go boxes.
To-go boxes. Oh, okay.
Hey, Matt, do you
Yeah.
want to can you make me can I share my screen as just a participant, or do you need to make me a co-host?
You should be able to share your screen. So
Okay, I'm just gonna try it real quick before. Okay,
Yeah.
yeah, I can do it.
you got it. Okay, cool.
I just wanted to make sure because
There,
I just want to make sure.
there's a friendly face I haven't seen in a while. Hi, Les. Oh, you're muted, Les.
How's that?
Perfect. Good to hear your
All right.
voice.
Been a while.
It has. Mary, you wouldn't know Les, but Pat, you might remember Les. He was one of the carpenters on the restoration of the main house.
Oh.
Yeah, so many
Yeah,
years
that's been a while ago. Yeah.
Yeah, it was 03 to 09.
Yeah, 03 to 09. Yep.
A
Oh,
good
wow.
gig.
We literally just hired someone to go through all those records. We're going to be, making that digital Model S, and we hired somebody to go through all the restoration records. So
Oh, great.
if your ears are burning, you'll know why, because somebody's looking at your picture.
Be sure you get some pictures of those wing roofs.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
God, they were a pain in the neck.
Well, they wouldn't be here without you all, so it would be collapsed on the ground.
I told Kevin and Mark about these sessions. I mean, Keith and Mark.
Oh, Keith and
I
Mark.
told
yeah,
them.
yeah.
Have
Very
they
cool.
shown up last couple of weeks?
I haven't, but it'd be fun to see them as well.
Yeah, well, they might show up anytime.
Well, if you send me their emails, and I'll put them
All
on
right.
the list.
Cool, I'll do it.
That'd be great. Thanks, Les.
They were supposed to do that themselves, of course.
Hey, Debbie.
Hi there.
How you
Hi there.
doing?
Huh?
How you doing?
Whoa, hanging in there. How are you?
You know, the sun's finally come out, so I'm excited that the temperature has creeped up today above 30. So
Yeah, it's very cold.
Oh.
Probably
Yeah,
not
you-
that cold in Texas, huh, Debbie?
The high today is supposed to be 80.
Oh, wow. Send us some warmth, Debbie. You can't keep all that to yourself.
Oh, you can have it all. I would really like to have some winter this year.
well, you can come take all the winter, and I will wear shorts in Texas and be totally contented.
Yeah, we'll move
Oh,
everything to
only.
Texas. You have a room at your house for a lab?
I can make room. But how are you guys doing?
Doing good.
Doing well.
I'm so glad to be here because it seems like I've missed the last few online things and the Facebook stuff, and I just am never at the computer when I'm supposed to be.
Well, I'm actually glad you said that because we are, while all of these get recorded and put on YouTube, they're a little hard to find, but we are literally in the process right now. Terry is building a web page that should be live very shortly where all of this stuff
Mhm.
can live and be easily found. So you could, if you searched YouTube right now, you could find it, but it's sort of kind of a hard thing to do. But it's going to be on the Digital Doorway website, and it's going to have all of archaeology's programs. So not all of Montpelier's virtual programs, but all of archaeology's virtual programs. So all of these lunch and learns are going to be up on that website, so you can watch them whenever works for you.
Oh, that's super.
Yeah, so you should, as soon as that page is live and built, we will send out the information, and that'll be a great way for
Oh,
people to
great.
go
And
back. And
we're gonna start sending these out with the reminders. So when we send the reminder on Wednesday morning, we'll have the link to all the old programs. So when we do I'm doing one next week on the crowdsourcing, we're gonna put that in there. Like Mary said, Terry's just developing this right now, so it's not quite ready at this exact minute, but probably in a day or two it will be.
Oh, that'll be great.
Mhm.
Except the only drawback to watching on YouTube is that you don't get to ask dumb questions.
well, you can always email us.
Yeah.
And
Actually, you could put the questions into YouTube because there's a question area there and we can answer them. We'll get notified.
Mhm.
Really? Huh.
Yeah, and then other people can see them. So if you asked a question on
Mhm.
YouTube, then they can see your question and what the answer was, as opposed to if you just email us and then you're the only one that gets it.
That'd be great. And it ups our ratings in YouTube for that. So
Yeah, awesome. So many nice familiar faces. Hello, friends. Faces and names with people that won't turn on their camera.
Hey, Peggy.
Happy, hi, Karen, hello.
Hey, Peggy.
Mary,
Hey,
hi.
Mary, Matt. It's so nice
all
to see
kinds of folks.
everybody.
Hello.
There you go.
Good to see y'all, y'all.
Oh, yay. Oh, everybody turn on your camera and wave.
Yeah, this is great. Hello.
Wave, hi.
Sarah, it's so nice to see you.
Hi.
It's great to see everybody. I was there Monday. We came up, we made a quick drive up and picked up a few Christmas gifts and then drove home. It was so great to see the place.
Oh, awesome, Karen.
Yeah, if you guys all are, that's a great point. If you're in the area, there are major sales at the gift
Mhm.
shop right now. And Julie, who runs the gift shop and the visitor center, asked that everyone buy as much as possible so she doesn't have to inventory it in January. But there's some really cool, neat of my favorite things are the hand carved wooden items from the trees at Montpelier. Those always make really good gifts. The light catchers are good Christmas tree ornaments that are based off the wine bottle seals. So there's good archaeology adjacent, really cool specific stuff. And as another thing, if you are in the area buying stuff, we're also doing a food drive here for the local food pantry in Orange, which has been hit really, really hard this year. A lot of people have been, but their donations are down and their demand is really, really up. So we're doing also a food drive right now for the local food pantry. So if you're here, drop off some macaroni and cheese and pick up some really good stuff from the gift shop. And say hello to us. I think half the staff is working this weekend. So.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
wish
and
I
if you want
worked
to do
closer.
tours with Terry, Mary, or I, let us know because we are doing tours this weekend.
And the gift shop does sell online for those of you that live very far away. So in case you're like me and wait till the last minute to buy Christmas presents. All right. So what we're going to do today is we're going to go ahead and get started. So this is, if you're not on mute now, I'm going to ask you to mute yourself. And then when questions come up, we can certainly unmute, but just so other people can hear in case there's dog barking or other things like that in the background. But today we're going to do the latest edition in our series of Do You Know What This Is? And today we're going to talk about bricks and rocks. So kind of more than just a rock, but instead of me just talking, Matt and I are going to kind of tag team this together. So I'm going to sort of talk about a little bit of, you know, how we handle the objects, how we identify them that fall into this category. And Matt's going to give us a lot of the geology and sort of the background of these things. So I'm really excited for this talk because just like I've said when putting together these things, this was a great learning experience for me. I haven't taken geology since 1999 and 2000 when I took 2 semesters of freshman geology, not because I failed it, because I took 1 and 2. So it was great to like put that hat back on. And it's also as a native Floridian where there are no rocks coming up here and digging. So the majority of my archaeological experience before moving to the mid-Atlantic had been on the Gulf Coast, not just in Florida, but also in the Mississippi Delta. Again, not a lot of rocks. So just learning the geology has a huge impact on how we can understand the archaeology. It affects how we read the soils. It affects what we look at, what we keep, what we classify. We used to argue down in Pensacola of whether something was a non-cultural stone or just a really large grain of sand, and was it worth keeping? And so that is quite a difference from the soils that we have up here. So going through this process has always been really fun for me. And so I hope it will be fun for you guys as well.
Well, I've always been jealous, Mary, of people that work in the tidewater or in a sandy area, because when you're in a sandy area and you find a rock, you know somebody brought it there, so it's an artifact. But I've always worked in the Piedmont, and it's just like, is this a rock we should keep, or it's just, if this is a native rock that's been here for 1 million years.
The site I did my master's thesis on had 1 rock. It was this big, and it was a piece of limestone that had been ballast in a ship that had somehow been taken out, carried, and we found it in within the structure of what had been the church.
That's
so
significant. That is an artifact.
Really amazing and really cool. But yes, to go from a site where you have 1 rock to sites where you have thousands in just 1 unit is quite a different experience.
And it makes us have these extreme gradation methods for, like, do we keep this little piece of greenstone, or we always keep the big piece of greenstone? And what about, quartz?
Yep, absolutely. So let's get into some of that kind of stuff. I am going to share my screen. All right, and you can all see that? Somebody, excellent, thank you for the
Yeah,
head nod,
yeah.
Dean. So, do you know what this is? More than just a rock. And I tried to make that little strip look like the blue felt that we lay down the inventory numbers on. That should look very familiar to Pat and Chris and some of the other folks who do this cataloging, but let's see. So a big question we get asked whenever anyone comes on one of our programs, whether it's an expedition program or to work in the lab, is it just a rock, or is the thing they're looking at just a rock? And often, you know, it is a rock, but just a rock implies that it doesn't have anything to tell us. And actually, rocks, bricks, and some of these things that seem less exciting have quite a bit to tell us. So the first thing they can tell us is about sort of the natural environment, the deposits, the geological history, all of those types of things. But the other big area that they can tell us is about the architecture of the site and the structures on the site. So you'll hear our team often saying the phrase ArcMat. I remember when I very first started working here, I was like, what are they talking about? What is ArcMat? What is this language that they're using? And it is just the abbreviation for architectural materials. And it took me, I think, a couple weeks to catch on to what the abbreviations all were. So if you hear us talking about ArcMat, that's what it is. And that includes all the materials that are used to build things like foundations and chimneys and hearths, but also walls and roofs and all different parts of the buildings. The majority of bricks and rocks are used in that context, certainly, that we find. But we also find rocks that are used for a variety of small finds. So I'm not really going to get too much into the small finds because we talked about these quite a lot in the small finds talk, which you can find on YouTube, and I have the link in it later. But rocks can also be used to make stone tools. So you can think about Native American or prehistoric bifaces or points. Spiritual items, which we'll touch on a little bit, writing utensils like slate pencils and writing slates, jewelries and beads. If you think about the famous carnelian ring, we have marbles here that are actually out of carved limestone. So that's kind of a neat thing. And then gunflints, of course, are another sort of rock-based object that we find. But all of those small finds objects are kind of found in very low quantity and are very small objects. And they're not certainly the bulk of what we look at when we have bricks and rocks. So just like any of our do you know what this is talks is, how are we going to identify it? So in order to identify the bricks and rocks that we have here, one of the first things we need to have is a magnet. Because everything is covered with sort of the red dirt of this area, sometimes it's hard to tell what something is, and taking a magnet to it can help you identify the difference between maybe if it's a magnetic glob of slag versus a natural rock. A magnifying glass is always super helpful. A piece of white scrap paper, so you can see sort of down in the bottom, I've taken a picture of scrap paper, and on that scrap paper, I've taken a bunch of different bricks and rocks and scratched on it. And that's one of our tools for when you are first learning to identify the difference between certain types of bricks and rocks, is to take the edge of them, scratch them on a piece of paper, and see what kind of mark they leave behind.
And Mary, colon tests get credit for that, because I used to bring home the bricks, the soft bricks, for them to write on the sidewalk with, and realized that the saprolite was doing the same thing. So that's where we transferred it to figure out what's saprolite and what's greenstone. So little children helping out.
Excellent. We also use the muriatic acid to identify limestone. So basically, we put a drop of acid on the rock, and if it fizzes, it has lime in it. So that's a wonderful sort of kind of quick way to verify something that you're not sure about. And it's fun because it fizzes and it feels like you're doing science. Of course, references, so websites, books, and our study collection. And the most important really for doing a lot of this identification is using your senses. So of course, your eyes, your ears, your fingernails, your teeth, your tongue. You can scratch certain things with your fingernails or try to scratch them to feel hardness. I think one of the biggest things that I learned years ago was you can often hear the difference in types of bricks by flicking them, kind of their density in how they are made, which is sort of a funny trick that I learned from a previous lab director. But looking at stuff, really kind of feeling, holding the weight differences, all of these can be clues in helping you identify these objects. So this was actually really interesting. Normally when I come to the slide of my favorite resources, I have a whole bunch that I go to on a regular basis. But for this, it was a little harder because really my primary resource is the study collection we have here. And a lot of that is because the bricks themselves are made on property. So it makes them sort of in many ways unique to this place, as opposed to bricks in a different state or even a different part of this state. So really relying on the study collection is my primary resource, but I included a couple that I really like. One is the Virginia Division of Geology and Mineral Resources is their website. And so this is just a screen grab from their webpage. And that little red dot in the center is the front gate of Montpelier. And what I thought was really cool is this is a geological map, and it shows that the purple side is a basalt base that Matt will talk about more. And then the kind of light greenish side is a sandstone base. So, and that little dot is right at the main gate. So if you think about where the Civil War Trail is, that has a different sort of geological predominance than where the majority of the property is. And I thought that was really interesting to kind of just see how the property kind of just falls along this change in the geology. But they have all sorts of really cool maps that you can play with on there to see the different sort of geological deposits and the effects that they have on the environment and across the state. Another resource I like, because so many of these materials are used in architecture, it's good to be familiar of what a building looks like as a whole. So the book Everyday Architecture of the Mid-Atlantic is a fantastic book with a lot of great drawings and photographs of what buildings across the Mid-Atlantic look like. And that can become really important when you are trying to, identify, okay, we have a foundation, but what is this foundation part of? Yes, I can put that in the chat. I don't know that I can do it right now, but I will do it when I'm done sharing my screen. And then the last one is something that this guy, Matt Reeves, I don't know if any of you guys have ever heard of him, but it's a article he put together that talks about the gradient sorting process and what can be learned from it, and sort of using, looking at different rocks and sort of pebbles that we find on the property. And so that's always just a great tool for understanding why we do what we do in the lab, but also the kind of information we can gain from it. So how do these materials get to the lab? I think this is sort of an interesting component of this process, is how do they get to the lab, and then what happens to them when they're here? And that is because there's so many bricks and rocks. If you guys were on while we were chatting in the beginning, really talking about the dominance of them across the site, I think is really important. So they come to the lab in two ways. The first way is that traditional dry screening in the field, which is what you see in the pictures. And what you can notice in both of these pictures is there's a little insert screen inside the main screen, and you can see the little silver handles on each end of it. And that screen has a 1/2 inch mesh. So all of the bricks and rocks that stay on the top of that screen get sent down to the lab as an architectural material sample that we then power wash and begin the cataloging process. But all the ones that fall through that screen, we don't keep. However, we keep artifacts like nails or ceramics or glass that only sit on top of a 1/4 inch mesh screen. So this already, we're doing a step in the field of weeding out by size of which bricks and rocks that we are going to send down to the lab, with the exception of some rock materials that we've identified as sort of special rocks, things like phyllite or slate that we'll talk about a little bit more. Once they're down in the lab, we dump them through 2 screens again. So we dump the rocks through a 2-inch by 2-inch grate. Anything that's bigger than a 2 inches by 2 inches, then we catalog. Anything that falls through the grate, again, we discard. And our bricks, we do it through a 1/2 inch. So in case anything little has kind of made its way through, we discard. After that, after we kind of do all of that, we do a cataloging process where they are counted, where they are weighed, but we don't keep all of the bricks and rocks unless they meet one of those criteria enumerated below. So if they are something sort of interesting, a certain kind of rock with a particular material or feature, so rounded rocks or phyllite, slate, or limestone, we will keep all of those. We don't keep all of the brick fragments. We only keep brick fragments that have at least 2 edges that we can measure dimensions off of, so that we can get a length, a width, or a height. So if we did not do this process, in which we are only keeping a selection of these materials, we would have been overrun with storing them, I would say 15 to 20 years ago, and our archaeology department's 20 years old. So there is so much of this that comes out, and we photograph everything before we discard it, and we weigh everything, and everything gets recorded and put into the database. If you ever have a chance to look under the deck of the lab, that will give you the idea of how much we discard. And that's just one place where we do this discarding. So really a huge amount. But what's also neat about this discarding process is it allows us to do some kind of really interesting things with these materials later on, including the mosaic that went into the Mere Distinction of Color exhibit. The other way things come down to the lab is through the water screening process. So when they take 3 gallons of soil, it often has bricks and rocks in it. They send it down to us. We then wash it through a window screen. So that's a 16th inch mess. It's very fine. And that process then goes through the gradient sorting process, where everything is sorted out by size through a set of different screens. And we only catalog the brick and rock fragments that are greater than a 1/2 inch. And the reason that is because that then lines up with the dry screening in the field to keep our data sort of as consistent as possible. And then eventually everything, of course, is measured. All the artifacts are cataloged and kept, but the remaining bricks and rocks, the grit, the pebbles, all of the other stuff, one sample of each of those from each provenience is kept. And then if there's extra samples, they are then discarded as well after it is all double checked. We always double check. But again, this is a way of managing storage as well as really trying to make sure that we aren't overwhelming ourselves with these kinds of materials. So as Matt was sort of alluding to in the beginning, all of this is a decision-making process where each step along the way, you have to make decisions of what's the best for the overall collection and what is the best way to answer the questions that you have, as well as provide enough information that archaeologists in the future can ask totally different questions that you never thought about, but still have enough information to answer them. So this is sort of our solution for that, is photograph, document, weigh, get it all in the database, get it all recorded, and then discard, but keeping a sample. So what can bricks tell us? Bricks can actually tell us quite a lot. And as I was putting together, I was like, wow, bricks really tell us a lot. So bricks can tell us about the architectural features of a building. So if you look at the bottom left corner, that's a picture of Liz excavating the very top of the chimney from the building that we originally called the South Kitchen, but we have now, through the architectural analysis, been able to attribute to having multiple lives: the kitchen, an enslaved quarter, possibly an office, and of course the starter home for James Madison Sr. and Nellie Conway Madison. And this chimney top that she excavated had a plaster band feature that is very, very similar to the chimney that you can see on the main house, the second chimney in the background. So that helped us date it, and also helped us understand the building better, of sort of its intent, because that's such an important decorative element. So building use, if you look to the right, you will see the foundations of that same building, and you can see where there have been extensions and additions and sort of reformatting of the building. So by looking at the bricks, looking at how they were used and where they were deposited, it can tell us what it was used. And in sort of the middle back of that picture, you can see some bricks look like they're making a floor, and we could see where at one point there was sort of a brick pad in flooring put in. And then of course in the center between the two of them is a compass brick, which are those pie-shaped bricks that are used to make columns. And this one you can see it was shaped into having some of the decorative features. So that lets us know it wasn't, those decorative features weren't just added with plaster later on, but were really in the design of the brick itself. Bricks are helpful for inner site dating in a very broad sense, where handmade bricks are older than machine-made bricks. So in a really broad way, you can compare site dating by age, but not in a very close specific way. But for a site like Montpelier, they are fantastic for dating within the site. So we have all these different building episodes associated with the construction and expansion of the main house. And we know that there's different bricks associated with those different time periods. And so it's a really important tool for us for understanding sort of intra-site dating and organization. So that is incredibly helpful for us. And that dating can't really translate out of sight because again, it's bricks made on property, used on property, around the property, a little different than compared to a different site, even one nearby. We can connect to individual masons through that same sort of dating process, which I think is really amazing, that we can connect to actual individuals that we know by name who were overseeing the production and the use of these bricks. And we can also connect very specifically to the enslaved brick makers. And the brick in the top right, of course, has a fingerprint in sort of the middle right of it, and then the marking of a number of how many bricks we think that enslaved person was made that day. So there's the number 74 on it. So bricks are amazing because they can give us these really big ideas about buildings and architecture, layout and time, but it is one of the only artifacts where you can get so incredibly personal, where you can connect through the fingerprints of the person that made it. Matt, is there anything you want to jump in on here?
Yeah, I was going to say that this is going to tie in very closely to what we'll talk about with the greenstones, because all the brick is made on the property, but not only is it fired on the property, but the clay comes from the soils of Montpelier, and it's because of this incredibly well-weathered soil horizon that the clay is formed to make the clay we've got here at Montpelier is some of the world's best brick making clay. In fact, there is a major brick making plant out by Somerset, where the Olympic Stadium that's down in Atlanta was built of these bricks. It didn't take the enslaved workers here at Montpelier long to realize the possibilities for this. At Mount Pleasant, there was, by the 1730s, they were already making bricks on the property. And a lot of this comes from a knowledge of the soils. And the easiest way to get the knowledge of the soils is the folks that are plowing the land are going to know where these clay patches are. Today, we don't know where some of the best clay patches are because the land hasn't been plowed extensively since the 1840s when enslaved Americans were working here. So it's that the enslaved workers' knowledge of the soils that allowed the clays to really be taken advantage of and use, the clays to make bricks. And it's why they're an incredibly important tool for us as archaeologists, for dating, for just the site, for defining what building is a more refined building versus not just a whole lot in those bricks.
There, I just want to address some of this stuff in the chat. Les mentioned about the portrait, which I didn't talk about. So the portrait in the center of the screen is an image of an enslaved child, and that was created as part of our Mere Distinction of Color exhibit. And each little component of it as a mosaic is a brick or a fragment of a brick that we recovered archaeologically and then disposed of after documenting and weighing. And this image was created as sort of a way to capture, one, that the majority of the people that were making many of these bricks, or many of the enslaved people that were making these bricks, were actually children. That was a job that was pretty typical of children to use, but also to sort of connect the artifacts themselves with the people who would have made them in sort of a grander sense. John also mentioned that finding animal prints in the handmade bricks. We have found that as well, which is really quite cool. I don't think we have ever found any evidence of a brick kiln, have we, Matt?
We have not. There's some thought that when the main house the cellar was dug out, you know, up at Montpelier, that could have been a source of clay, and it could have even been fired there, because we had a lot of strange colored bright clays in the cellar that usually come from higher firing. But we have not found it like an intact brick clamp with the brick still in place, which a lot of times, you know, archaeologists have found in other properties. That's our dream to find.
And then Pat asked, do you use chemical analysis to match various pieces of rock and brick found across the plantation to find their source or trace movement of the fragments? We have not used chemical analysis up to this point that I know of.
Yeah, we tried that with some of the clay, but there's so many variables in this metamorphosed basalt that it didn't work out well. It's one of the first things I tried when it got here.
Awesome. Let's go on to some rocks. All right, so let's talk a little bit about limestone. So this is one of the rocks that I sort of had as identified as a special rock. So these are ones that we keep, even if they are smaller than that 2-inch by 2-inch size. They're a little bit more unique, a little bit more rare for what we find. This is, again, we can identify them by their softness, the reaction to the acid. So lime can be used ground up as part of mortar, lime wash and plasters, and then of course hand carved objects like the marbles that I mentioned before. Phyllite is another rock that we find around here. It often has this kind of shiny green color to it, like you see on the left. The one on the right looks more green in person. I don't know why it looks so gray in this picture. But again, this is something that is used architecturally. Usually when I describe phyllite to someone, I say it's kind of like a green shiny slate is what it looks like. And it was used for roofing and other sort of architectural materials. I think that the piece on the left that looks more green, you can see where there's a hole punched in it, and just above, kind of above to the right, it almost looks like it's blending in with the wood behind it. That's actually a blank, that little circle shape. That is a little small piece of phyllite that had been punched out of a hole. But Matt, do you want to talk a little bit about John Payne Todd's connection to phyllite?
Yeah, I've got the picture, the slide that is next will help with that. Yeah, when we started finding the phyllite, especially in the South Yard, but when we were digging at Mount Pleasant early on, we found that the mortar for the original house from the 1730s was made not with a limestone-based mortar, but with burnt oyster shell. And then very soon, by the time you get to 1732, they found a limestone deposit. And Mary, if you push the button a couple of times, some of the animations will appear. Yeah, this one, that the thin magenta line there, that bright kind of pink color, that is a line of limestone, and it's the only it's the only source of limestone in the Piedmont. You've got to go all the way to the Shenandoah Valley to find any limestone. And of course, the importance of the limestone is when you crush it and burn it, you can make quicklime that then is the source, the base material for making mortar and then also plaster. So by the mid 1730s, the enslaved workers in the area had come across these limestone deposits and then began being assigned to mine them. And actually, James Madison Jr. purchased a specific location. And Mary, if you push the button 2 more times, I think there'll be, okay, one more time. Oh, no, I guess it didn't appear. Shoot, the right where, Mary, you might be able to circle where it says Todd's birth. Go down a little bit to the right. It's a white text.
Oh, right here.
Yeah, right there. Right there, that's the site that that is a Madison-owned piece of property that's specific to this limestone deposit. So the Madisons actually bought land that covered this limestone deposit so they could assign slaves to quarry it. And for the first, 80 years of the estate, the main material that was used was the limestone for construction of brick buildings and used as a mortar. But as Mary alluded to, what we started finding in the South Yard was all this phyllite, which is this low-grade slate, and with holes punched in it, which made it evident that it was being used for something. Down at Monticello, they found this phyllite. Jefferson was having his slaves use it for paving surfaces. And we've been wondering whether or not it could have been used here because of the holes around hearths for firebox surrounds, because it withholds the heat pretty well. But there's a whole industry that's been set up down along this line of limestone. First was the picture on the bottom right is a picture of one of the lime kilns that's down along the Everona limestone deposit. And this one is an late 18th, early 19th century kiln, but there are several like this in the area. But then John Payne Todd started to not only have slaves mine the limestone, but also he found some very poorly metamorphosed limestone that had become marble. And he started to have his slaves mine that to sell it as for marble production. But that venture, like many of John Payne Todd's, failed because it wasn't a high enough grade of marble to really work out for any kind of construction. But we do find a number of fragments of that in the South Yard. So one thing we've been wondering is whether or not the slaves that were assigned to do the quarrying down at Todd's birth, you brought some of this material for use on their own homes. We don't think there are any buildings at Montpelier that use this for a slate roof, but definitely for any kind of, what's unique about the limestone and the phyllite is it's a flat rock, which makes it, more easily used to cover surfaces to harden them, and that's why we're thinking about the hearths. But when we get into talking, after Mary talks about the Greenstone and Quartz, I'll present the geologic timeline. These limestones and phyllites are incredibly old. They go back to about 600 million years old, and they're the part of the Proto-Atlantic Ocean that formed with the separation of the first major supercontinent, which was called Gondwana. So I'll get into that when we get to the timeline about Greenstone. But suffice to say, this limestone deposit has been incredibly important for the area. It's why there's such nice, and this limestone deposit runs basically from up in Culpeper all the way down to Monticello, and has been an incredibly important part of the estates in this area.
Matt, Mim asked about how wide is the deposit. So you just said about how long it is. It looks incredibly narrow. Do you know how wide it is?
Yeah, there's 5,280 feet in a mile. We're talking about, some areas it's like about 40 feet, other areas it's about 200 to 300 feet. So it's an incredibly narrow band. And so Madison's actually purchased their section in 1797. And this is after, there was the band had been well defined, and some of the better areas for mining the limestone had been located, because not all the lime in this area, limestone is good for making mortar production. But it's something we're doing research on. Actually, one of our volunteers, Ron, has been doing research on the deeds, and we're trying to track out the deed for the area that Madison originally had his slaves mine for limestone, and hopefully be able to find that mine and locate some of the archaeological features there.
Awesome, thank you. All right, speaking of Greenstone, the rock called Greenstone that every time I show it to someone, they're like, that's not green. Often because when we find greenstone, it looks pretty different. So greenstone is the rock we find the most of. It is incredibly tricky, I think, particularly for folks of you that are on this call that have been on an expedition where you're digging and you're screening and you're trying to figure out, is this a brick? Is this a rock? Is this a piece of ceramic? I'm so confused. It all looks the same because it's all the color of the clay. But greenstone, the picture on the bottom shows greenstone in its 3 different states, sort of the fresh greenstone on the far left, where it does have sort of that green color, kind of a olivey green to it. The weathered greenstone, which is what we see the most of, which looks like a brick. It's red, but you can see also this greenstone is incredibly angular and can be really deceptive because it will look like it has these man-made angles to it. And then the saprolitic greenstone, which we mentioned a little bit before, which is on the right, which kind of has a very powdery, soft, almost ochre yellow quality to it. So that's one that we would scratch on the paper to identify. In the far right, we have an overhead shot looking over the foundations of the South Yard double quarters. And the one in the southeast has this partial stone foundation and then stone piers that it was set up on. So I like to include it because it's a sort of this utilization of what are the resources around. And there is a whole lot of resources around. Just like we have this really good clay around for making bricks, there is a lot of rocks around that are large enough that can be used for architectural purposes. In the top right is sort of the end of a ground celt. So kind of like an axe that would have been made out of greenstone. And greenstone's an incredibly hard rock, so that grinding down to make that shape is really pretty impressive. And then in the center is artifacts that may look pretty familiar to some of you, which we lovingly call devil's die, which are these little outcrops that occur. They are not greenstone themselves, but they occur in the greenstone features, and you can see sort of what they look like. And then there's sort of the shape of what one would have looked like when it came out of the stone outcropping. So Matt, do you want to talk a little bit about greenstone with this, or do you want to click to the next one?
Oh, go ahead and click to the next one, because I've got the maps that'll
Oh,
talk
okay.
about it, both the quartz and the greenstone.
So the greenstone and the quartz are very closely related, which Matt will talk about geologically, but quartz is probably the trickiest of all of these materials besides the greenstones, because at some point with the greenstone, when you're screening, you sort of get over it like, oh, okay, it's either a brick or a greenstone. I can move past this. But quartz, you'll see something white and shiny and go, oh, it's a ceramic. Oh, it's a quartz. Oh, it's the glass. Oh, it's quartz. And so this is sort of a routine, but quartz itself can actually be really important for our understanding of the past. Quartz is a really commonly used for making those stone tools like bifaces or spear points by indigenous and native peoples. We also find the naturally occurring crystals. So you can see kind of in the center picture has just kind of angular quartz in the back and some crystals in the front. And then very large crystals we find. And it seems that there is some practices by members of the enslaved community of finding these crystals, collecting them, and then using them as part of a spiritual or religious practice. And the biggest clue that we had for this is the discovery of quite a large, about a 4-inch long quartz crystal in the corner pier of the foundation of the southwest double quarter. So when we did reconstruct that building, we got a quartz crystal of similar size and shape and put it in the exact spot that it would have been. And you can see on the right there is the ceremony when members of the enslaved descendant community placed that quartz crystal in that foundational pier for the reconstructed building. And the actual crystal is on display in the exhibit case in that building. So you can go see it, but you can also know that the building itself is receiving sort of the same kind of spiritual protection or kind of good luck that the crystal would have provided. There is a sort of long history of connection to certain components of West African religions or spiritual practices that includes kind of the adoption of often white shiny things that are placed in the corners of rooms, the corners of buildings, but also in thresholds as kind of keeping bad spirits out, you know, or kind of for luck or protection. And you see this on archaeological sites of African diasporic communities in the Caribbean, all across North America, kind of all over the Atlantic world. Right, sure, Matt.
Yeah, there's the map. Thanks, Mary. Yeah, for the why we didn't take a break between the Greenstone and the Quartz is that they're all part of the same formation. And to understand that is want to talk a little bit about the geology of the Greenstone formation. This map shows basically the area on the right-hand side. If you click once, Mary, it should come, yeah, with the Southwest Mountains. And then if you click one more time, yeah, there's the Blue Ridge Mountains. So this is a large scale map of the Central Virginia area. And basically the area that's in tan is this Greenstone formation. And as Mary was saying, if you look at where Mary's arrow is where Montpelier is. The red outline is the property outline for Montpelier. And as Mary was mentioning, this line of Greenstone cuts right through the middle of the Montpelier property. And at one time, this Greenstone, this band of Greenstone was one giant anticline, but meaning like a folded rug. If you pushed a rug and it makes these giant folds, the synclines are the downward folds and the anticlines are the upward folds. This fold was connected, but it's weathered down through time through erosion. So the top has been cut out of it. This was all the base of these massive Appalachian mountains that were the size of the Alps about 300 million years ago, but have since eroded down. And the only place these greenstones are left is the Blue Ridge Mountains, which today is, you know, where the Shenandoah National Park is, and then the Southwest Mountains, which is this massive band of heavily eroded but also heavily weathered greenstone that creates this incredibly nutrient-rich set of soils. When we did some of our well digging here at Montpelier for the hydrothermal wells in the backyard of the main house, I remember the people that did the well digging, well drilling, they came from upstate New York, and they brought only about 25 feet of casing. And that's because they were expecting to hit bedrock at about 25 feet. They didn't hit bedrock until they got down to 100 feet, which means these soils have been chemically weathering, you know, through heat and humidity for, you know, tens of thousands of years, if not hundreds of thousands of years, and have created these incredibly deep clay soils. All this is from this Catoctin greenstone. And I'll show you a slide in a few that show where the patent line is. This really determined where, you know, these soils were determined by the underlying bedrock, but that helped, you know, determine where these patent lines were taken out in the earlier in the 18th century. And it's no accident that all the large estates that, you know, between Monticello and you can see Charlottesville down in the middle lower part of the picture right there, from Charlottesville all the way to Montpelier, this is the location of all these incredibly wealthy estates that have been wealthy from the 18th century all the way up until today. You know, the area to the west of the Southwest Mountains is bounded by Route 20, and then the other side is bounded by 231, and creates this corridor of wealth that comes from, you know, this incredibly rich soils. But getting into the geology of this, if you go to the next slide, Mary, this is a picture of straight from your geology textbook, Mary, from back in 1999, showing these rift zones and these subduction zones. And if you click one more time, Mary, the origin of these Catoctin greenstones is basalts at the bottom of the ocean. And to explain how they got into the upland, it's explaining about 300 million years of geologic history. These basalts first were formed and erupted out of the earth about 600 million years ago, when the original supercontinent Gondwana began to rift apart. And it's at this time when this proto-Atlantic Ocean began to be formed. This is also when all these limestone deposits were formed that happen to make up the limestone deposits we were talking about just a little while ago, which are the Everona limestone belt. So both the origin of the basalts for the greenstones and the limestones occur about 600 million years ago. So you're talking about some fairly ancient rocks going back to the Precambrian time period. What happens is this proto-Atlantic Ocean opens up, and if you click the slide one more time, Mary, the ocean 300 million years ago closes, and that's when the continent of Africa and North America collide to create Pangaea, the more recent supercontinent. And this is what created the Appalachian orogeny, which is the formation of these massive Appalachian mountains that 300 years ago were absolutely massive, but over 300 million years have weathered down. And so what happened to this basalt, this layer of basalt, when it gets subducted under the North American continent, it gets put under tremendous pressure and heat. And that's what makes it from a basalt into a greenstone. And this is where we get all these quartz deposits that are in the greenstones. Because what happens is, as this basalt is forced under the North American continent to make Pangaea, there are fissures that occur. And these fissures, or these cracks in the rock, this is hundreds of miles down in below the Earth's surface, they're filled with these hydrothermal deposits of quartz that form these veins of quartz in amongst the greenstone. And that's where we've got some pieces of quartz that are actually, they're crystalline in formation and they're flat. And you can see where they were bounded on either side by the greenstone. We haven't found any of this greenstone where the greenstone and the quartz is together, but I need to look around at some exposed areas. I've got a great example of some of this I found in the Shenandoah Valley years ago, or the Shenandoah Park, where it's a red jasper, a cryptocrystalline quartz that's in a vein. And I'll send a picture of that later. But basically all the greenstones we've got here are these incredibly ancient rocks that have been metamorphosed and then later on have been weathered down. And if you go to the next slide, Mary, this again, here's this picture of the greenstones. Click one more time, Mary. And the picture that Mary showed of the different grades of greenstone, the one on the very left there where, that's my arrow, Mary, not yours. The one on the left there, that one is true, what you think of why it's called greenstone is this is an unweathered piece of greenstone, what it looks like in its native element. And if you skip one over, Mary, to that red one, the red one in the middle, this is a piece of greenstone that's been oxidized and chemically weathered from being exposed to, maybe within probably 50 feet of the ground surface. So you've got groundwater that's gone into it and turned the irons, this very iron-rich greenstone, into rust. And that's what gives us this red color. And then finally, the one that's all the way over on the right, it can either be this yellow saprolite or an orange saprolite, all of which you can, when you scratch it across a piece of paper, it's weathered enough where it leaves a mark. This is this hyper-weathered greenstone that's basically the next stage of that is forming into the clay. So if you dug a profile in the Davidson clay loam that was 100 feet deep, you'd get this profile from clay to silts to the saprolite to the reddish rock and then finally down to the green bedrock about 100 feet down. And it's this incredibly stable landscape, that in this case is around 100 million years old, that has allowed, to have this incredibly rich soil. And if you click one more time, Mary, I think I've got a slide. Yeah, I've got a slide of the property. And click one more time, Mary. Yeah, this orange line that Mary was talking about, on the right is all the greenstones, and on the left is the pink and the green colored soils. Those are sandstones. But what's kind of neat about those sandstones is when you look at what's in those sandstones, sandstone is rock that's been moved and weathered from the parent material. It's all greenstone. So when you walk through the McGowan encampments along the Civil War Trail in the Northwoods, you'll find these conglomerates that are, it's a sedimentary rock. But when you look at the clasts and the pebbles that are in that sandstone, it's all quartz and greenstone. So it's all material from these massive greenstone Appalachian mountains that was weathered out into this Triassic basin. And I think the Triassic period, the Triassic is about 200 million years ago. So this was when all these Appalachian mountains were eroding down. But when you click one more time, Mary, I don't know if this slide, go ahead and click back. It didn't, I did this after you started your PowerPoint. It's fine, but what's wild is I don't even have to have the line appear. Where that pink dotted line appears, that's the exact line for the Madison patent line. Everything that's in that kind of buff colored area of the property, that's what the Madisons patented, or actually Francis Taylor's parents patented in the 1720s to make up what would eventually become Montpelier. And how they knew to patent this area wasn't because they did a geological study of the rocks, because these rocks are buried under about 100 feet of soil. It was basically looking at the trees. When you look at the trees that are growing to the southeast of this line versus what's growing to the northwest, you get, like where the Catoctin Greenstone is, you get lots and lots of large chestnuts at the time. These are now trees that no longer flourish in the Piedmont because of the chestnut blight of 1911. But you also get walnuts, you get white oak. But when you go to the area where Gilmore is, the flora in that area are very different than what you've got in the landmark forest. So basically, just by looking at the growth of trees, that's where they were able to see where the better underlying soils are. And what they wanted to do with the soil, of course, was to grow tobacco. Little did they know that the origins for this patent line go back, 600 million years to, this story of the Catoctin Greenstone. So the Catoctin Greenstone, in many ways, is what allowed Montpelier to be such a wealthy estate, and in many ways allowed Madison to become the person who we know is the father of the Constitution. So we have some ancient geology to thank for the U.S. Constitution, and of course all the labor that went into that with the enslaved Americans who were there. So that's where the greenstone not only is a source for the soils for growing crops, but it's also a source of the clays that were used for making the brick. And then there's a few areas where we've got some greenstone quarries on the property. One of them is over at the home farm. And that's, unfortunately, that quarry has been buried through erosion through the years. But studying some of the quarrying activities of the slaves is kind of what we're interested in looking at next with some of the work that we're doing. So, but that's what I've got for the geology of the greenstones, Mary.
Hey, Matt, can you do 20 seconds on Devil's Die?
Yeah, the Devil's Die. That was one when I got here, we were, Lynn Lewis would talk about the square pieces of rock that were Devil's Die, and they look exactly in their crystal formation exactly like pyrite or fool's gold. And a good friend of mine who's since passed, Cullen Sherwood, he was a geologist over at James Madison University. His specialty was these greenstone deposits. And what he told me is that in the metamorphic process of metamorphosing the basalts into greenstones, what comes out of this mafic material are the crystals of the Devil's Die are one of the first to form inside what was basically kind of a viscous mass of this hot hot basalt. And so they form, and if we were able to find some that were unweathered, they would look like shiny fool's gold. But in the weathering process, that's how they turn black. But what they all are more resistant to chemical weathering than the surrounding greenstone, because while the surrounding greenstone turns into clay soil, these devil dye stay, as cubes. They're just black cubes. So that's where in some areas, like over at Mount Pleasant, we have lots and lots of devil dye. But then when we're over in the South Yard, we don't find a lot. But so they're, they occur naturally, and it's kind of a neat connection to fool's gold.
Excellent. All right, I'm gonna hit our last slide, and then there's some questions I know we want to get into. So sort of the last slide for today is just again a call back to how these materials show up, or how rocks show up in other ways. So the small finds, so you can see on the top left, that's of course the carnelian ring. The bottom left is a quartz biface. So that's I think a stemmed archaic point right there. In the center is a gun flint. You've got the limestone marble on the bottom right, and then of course the slate pencil. And then I have the link down at the bottom there to the talk about small finds. And I will put this link as well as the other links in the chat while we ask and answer some questions. So I'm going to stop sharing.
Oh, and Mary, what we'll do is with everybody registering, we have everybody's email. I'll have Sarah Lee send out those links that you've got, but also I made because I'm a GIS geek, I made a geology map that's specific to Montpelier that shows some of these sites. So
awesome. So let's see. Matt, do you want to dive into some of the questions in the chat?
Yeah. Let's see. The pink. So this is from Patrick. The pink dashed line is the property line in the sense that James Madison's great grandfather James Taylor obtained the patent for the area. In other words, when James Taylor of the Knights of the 1860 Golden Horseshoe, about 1760. Yeah, that's the same patent, Patrick. James Taylor, with the surveys that he did, established that. And
Andrea had asked Matt if the pink line was a property line, and so I was trying to say yes, it becomes a property line because as you noted, Matt, Madison's great grandfather sees that land, the flora on that land, and so he patents that area. So I was trying to answer Andrea's question.
I got you. I see it now when I scroll up. Yeah, no, that's excellent. Thank you, Patrick. Yeah, exactly. It's the boundary between the Catoctin greenstone and the sandstone, but it also matches up with the patent line.
Do you see Prinny has a question too, is so what led to these rich soils being worn out by tobacco? We talked about how amazingly rich the soils are, but sort of, can you talk about their relationship with tobacco?
Yeah, with tobacco just sucks the nutrients out of soils, and without really a riverine based soil where you get new nutrients being brought in, or manuring soil, basically even the Catoctin based greenstone soils get worn out with tobacco. Now on the other hand, corn and grains with nitrogen fixing, that allows the soils to be replenished, but tobacco just takes too much nutrients out. That's where we discovered in the Eastwoods some of these lower areas where you get a lot of erosion. Those are about the only areas that were able to be used for tobacco production. And Prinny, I'll send you the Eastwoods story map that talks about that.
So Jane asked the question, and I can start to answer it while you get yourself organized. Has anyone tried to replicate making bricks in the handmade method using local clay? Yes, we have. And some of you on this call actually, I think, have helped us do that. So a couple of years back, when we were working on beginning the reconstruction of the South Kitchen / starter home of Madison Senior and Nellie, our historic preservation department set up a handmade brick area where we all, visitors, expeditioners, staff, made bricks doing the handmade method, and we fired them here on the property. So they built a temporary brick kiln over, I I'm pointing because it's behind me on the property because I'm in the lab, over behind the big schooling barn, kind of back that area, and we fired them all right on the property. And then the firing, the bricks, we didn't make enough to do all of the brickwork, and the bricks didn't turn out to be in as quite good of quality as we had hoped to do all of the brickwork for the kitchen, but they have been used in that reconstruction of that building, I think, as the facing on some of it. So a lot of us tried our hand at it, and our feet too, because to mix the clays with the water, the best way to do it is sort of Lucy and Ethel style from Isle of Lucy with the grapes. So rolling up your pants and squishing around in your feet, which was a really fun thing to do in the summer.
And Mary, it's worthy to note that we tried making brick from Montpelier clay during the main house restoration. This is about 15 years ago. And we could not find the right clay in the property to make the bricks and make them so that they would hold together. And that's because we have very few areas in the Catoctin that are open for agriculture, and no one knows where these soils are. And that's where the knowledge of the enslaved workers is what allowed the bricks to be made, because not all clay is equal in terms of brick making. You gotta have a soil with an incredibly high clay content, and that only occurs in certain soil horizons. So it's this local knowledge that comes from agriculture, ironically, that leads to you being able to make brick.
I think the same is true for locally made ceramics. And I think it's, you know, there's this huge knowledge base that we don't necessarily think of, but is connected so deeply to the land, knowing the land, being familiar with it. And I think when we think about this property and we think about 6 generations of enslaved people on this property, that kind of knowledge that gets passed down with that familiarity is so important.
And it was the slaves that held that. Everybody talks about, oh, Madison, or that Madison's grandparents patenting the land and knowing where the right land was. It was the enslaved community that had that knowledge.
So we're right at 1 o'clock, but I do want to offer you, because we didn't really get into this, but could you maybe speak for like 2 minutes about some of the masons and sort of how we can connect to particular masons or what we know about masons?
Yeah. That the mason we know the most about is Hugh Chisholm, who is the mason that did the work on the additions and had built oversaw the construction of the temple. And we know that he fired bricks on the property because there's letters from the main builder talking about Hugh Chisholm starting to fire bricks on the property. So we know that is a Montpelier clay. He was not as skilled a mason, mainly because of it. He was at the peak of his alcoholic career when he was here in 1808 to 1812. So a lot of those bricks were literally falling apart when we were doing the restoration. We had to replace a lot of that brickwork, and that's why the house was stuccoed in the 1840s. But some of the earlier brick that was made in the 1760s for the 1765 house is absolutely superb. And for all this brick, when you stand in front of the house and look at the 1797 versus the 1765 edition, you can literally see the differences in the color of the brick that's coming from probably the color of what the source of the clay was, and just the localized differences even on the property that showing that the brick clamps are probably in very different areas for these different periods. So yeah, at some point it would be really neat to find out what the signature for that is. One of the ways we found is, one is from the size of the bricks. We're able to differentiate the different periods. But then also there's differences in the kind of clasts or like sands that are mixed into the brick, and that has a factor in it too. So there's a lot more work we have, we can do with the bricks that are here.
Awesome. Well, because we are a few minutes after 1, I think we should wrap up. But I wanted to end with that because I think it's really important that when we talk about these really big ideas or the things that seem very far away from individuals, that we remember that there are so many people on this property that did this work and made these contributions. And it's always nice to hear a different name that maybe we hadn't heard before. So kind of add Hugh Chisholm to our list of interesting characters that were at Montpelier. Thank you all so much for joining us. Please join us for our next ones. We will be in touch about when they are, and we will let you know when the web page is up, where you can easily find past talks. If you have any ideas for a talk that you want to hear about, email us. You can email me, mfminkoff@montpelier.org. You can email Matt, or you can always email dig@montpelier.org. And we'd love to hear what you want to know more about. And I think that would be really helpful for us as we plan out our next talks.
Yeah, next week we're going to talk about the crowdsourcing that we've been doing with people volunteers doing data entry, and some of Ron's work with the deeds, and get some ideas, some crowdsource ideas. So, all right, good talking with everybody.
Me.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.